Welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in. You are listening to The Account with a news report for day 363 on the war in Ukraine. Today's report is a bit longer than usual due to the extra news segments and a rather long assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. What a day! We have two grand speeches of world leaders from opposing sides on the same day. Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered his annual State of the Nation address in front of the Federal Assembly. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden started his speech in Poland after reportedly listening to Putin's address first. We will have a look at both speeches as both leaders talked about the situation in Ukraine. I also have another fake news warning I want to mention. The other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, including an announcement for training exercises near the Belarusian border, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, with an interesting report on leaked documents regarding a plan by Putin to take over Belarus by 2030, and the international developments. And before we start the report, here's the fake news warning. A fake episode of the National News Telethon of Ukraine was published today. In the video, it is alleged that Ukraine is planning to create concentration camps for Russian soldiers. The statement is based on a comment by Ukrainian public figure Dmytro Korczynski. However, the footage of this episode was already filmed in 2017 for a pro-Russian channel owned by Viktor Medvedchuk. Korczynski is not a Ukrainian official or a member of parliament, and his words are not the position of the state but only his personal opinion. Moving on to the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Not much new to report here today. Currently, Russia is trying both in the north and south of Bakhmut to break through Ukrainian defenses to encircle the city and capture iconic locations ahead of the anniversary of the war. In the north, heavy fighting is reported in Berchivka and Yahidne. In the south, Russian forces are trying to establish a foothold near the MiG monument, a popular location for Ukrainian defenders to take selfies. The other frontline flashpoints have been rather quiet the past days. While fighting continues also in these locations, nothing major was reported. It seems Russia is focusing on gaining any success in Bakhmut for propaganda purposes. During the recording of the report, explosions were reported in Donetsk and Makiivka. Videos of Russian air defense engaging targets and explosions in the cities were shared online.
Давай еще одну взлетаю, я хочу снять. Вот оно. Пипец. Нифига себе. Да, лети.
Будет до разрыва. Вон он падает. Вон оно падает.
Ярик, это я рядом. Ярик, пожалуйста.
Да погоди, не ссы. Это грады. Нихуя себе! Еблись. Вон оно ПВО летит еще.
To start the news segment, the speech by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Владимир Владимирович Путин.
Добрый день, прошу вас. Добрый день.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has delivered his address to the Federal Assembly today. The 2-hour-long speech focused especially on the situation in Ukraine and why the war had to happen in Putin's eyes. The BBC Live ticker has a lot of information on the speech in English if you do not want to translate the Russian ones. It also covered US President Joe Biden's speech. Putin repeated the Kremlin's message that Russia is the victim and Ukraine, allegedly subjugated by the West, started the war, and the Kremlin was forced to launch the special military operation, expecting strikes on Russia's historic lands that were occupied by Ukraine. We were doing everything possible to solve this problem peacefully, negotiating a peaceful way out of this difficult conflict, but behind our backs, a very different scenario was being prepared, Putin claimed. According to him, the West's goal is to make Russia suffer, but destabilization of the Russian society through sanctions has utterly failed. He further mentioned the topic of spiritual staples while speaking about the West. Putin is especially outraged by Western priests blessing same-sex marriages and promised to defend Russian children from such degradation. He went on to thank the people of the annexed territories in Ukraine for choosing to be with their motherland and once again repeated the Kremlin's claim that this restores the historical justice. Putin also stated that he instructed the Ministry of Defense and Rosatom, the national nuclear regulator, to ensure readiness for nuclear tests, as he believes that the United States can conduct tests and create new types of nuclear munitions. Because of this, he declared the suspension of the New START Treaty, the only remaining major nuclear arms control pact between Russia and the United States. He also mentioned that he signed a decree on putting new ground-based strategic systems on combat duty a week ago. Interestingly, Putin called the creation of the Edelweiss Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine a manifestation of neo-Nazism in his address, but Russia has two units called Edelweiss, one in the Federal Penitentiary Service and one in the Russian National Guard. Putin ultimately did not say anything new during his address. Most of it was the repetition of the same propaganda that the Kremlin has used since the beginning of the war, albeit in a much more radical format. The speech can be roughly summed up as: Russia has always tried to solve things peacefully, but the West, supporting a neo-Nazi regime, provoked the war and tried to turn Ukraine against Russia. After Putin's speech concluded, it was reported that the Novaya Zemlya test site is kept ready for new nuclear tests. Novaya Zemlya, an archipelago in the Arctic Barents Sea, is where the Soviet Union conducted most of their nuclear weapon tests, including the famous 1961 Tsar Bomba, the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated. The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called Putin's claims absurd, saying, "No one is attacking Russia. There is a kind of absurdity in the idea that Russia was under some form of military threat from Ukraine or anyone else." US Secretary of State Antony Blinken called Russia's decision to suspend its participation in the Nuclear Arms Control Treaty deeply regrettable and irresponsible. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, meanwhile, stated he regrets Russia's decision, saying Russia has walked away from key arms control agreements over the past year and the Kremlin should reconsider. And now for the speech by US President Joe Biden. In his speech in Warsaw, Poland, US President Joe Biden said that Kyiv stands strong and Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. 1 year ago, the world was bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Well, I have just come from a visit to Kyiv and I can report that Kyiv stands strong, Biden said in Warsaw. During his speech, he also mentioned the crimes committed by the Russian army and its mercenaries, saying, "They have committed depravities, crimes against humanity without shame or compunction. They have targeted civilians with death and destruction, used rape as a weapon of war." Biden went on to assure the Russian people that the West was never plotting to attack Russia as Putin claimed. However, the West will not tire in its support for Ukraine to defend itself against Russian aggression. According to the US president, Putin was wrong to assume the West will simply roll over, that NATO was divided and would fracture, and that the weaponization of energy would crack Europe's resolve. Biden praised Poland for its exemplary conduct in supporting Ukraine and its warm reception of Ukrainian refugees. However, he warned, hard and bitter days lie ahead for Ukraine. Joe Biden also mentioned that the US will host next year's NATO summit as the alliance will celebrate its 75th anniversary. During his speech, the US president mentioned Putin 10 times, although the speech was not specifically written as an answer to Vladimir Putin's speech.
And all that we do now must be done so our children and grandchildren will know it as well. Freedom. The enemy of the tyrant and the hope of the brave and the truth of the ages. Freedom. Stand with us. We will stand with you. Let us move forward with faith and conviction and with an abiding commitment to be allies, not of darkness but of light, not of oppression but of liberation, not of captivity but yes, of freedom. May God bless you all. May God protect our troops. And may God bless the heroes of Ukraine and all those who defend freedom around the world. Thank you, Poland. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you're doing. God bless you all.
And now a look at all the minor news out of Ukraine. Ukraine, the European Union, and NATO are joining forces to increase the production of weapons and ammunition for the needs of the Ukrainian army and to replenish the ally stocks, Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba stated. He further said that his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi shared with him the key positions of a Chinese peace plan, which will be examined in detail by the Ukrainian side after receiving the text in full. Oleksiy Reznikov, Ukrainian defense minister, has said that the anti-Kremlin coalition already consists of 54 countries. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has arrived in Kyiv for a visit. Meloni is expected to visit Bucha and Irpin, which have become symbolic sites of Russian terror in Ukraine. After, Meloni is set to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky for a meeting. Starting today, Ukrainian soldiers will be conducting military training exercises in the exclusion zone of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant close to the Belarusian border. The aim is to prepare the military units for a possible offensive from the north. The training is set to continue over the next days. According to an analysis by the Kiel Institute of the World Economy, Ukraine has not yet obtained at least a quarter of the heavy weapons promised by the West. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said during a press conference with President Zelensky that Italy is considering the possibility of sending other air defense systems to Ukraine, in addition to the SAMPT Mamba complexes, which it plans to transfer together with France. Meanwhile, President Zelensky, commenting on China's peace plan, stated that Ukraine has its own peace formula and the vote at the UN General Assembly will take place on February 23rd. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. According to the National Resistance Center, Russian occupiers are confiscating passports from Ukrainians in the temporarily occupied territories. The center reported that the occupiers go to people's homes and demand to be given property ownership documentation and other documents in accordance with Russian legislation regulations, but this is only possible if they have Russian citizenship. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Russia's foreign ministry has summoned US Ambassador Lynn Tracy, expressing complaints over growing support for Ukraine and the investigation of sabotage on the Nord Stream pipelines. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner PMC, has received more than $250 million in revenue over the past 4 years from oil, gas, diamond, and gold production in countries such as Sudan, Syria, and others. According to American intelligence officials cited by the New York Times, Russian President Vladimir Putin can mobilize even more Russians. The officials are quoted as stating that they are picking up indications that Putin may soon mobilize more Russians into the military, adding hundreds of thousands to the 300,000 already called up. The Chamber of Representatives of Belarus approved the bill with changes to the Criminal Code of Belarus after the second reading. The bill suggests implementing the death penalty for treason. Chinese leader Xi Jinping is planning to visit Moscow for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the coming month, the Wall Street Journal reported, citing people familiar with the matter. Russian officials are bracing for another wave of military mobilization, actively looking into opportunities to massively mobilize students of higher educational facilities across the country. Russia is planning to take full control of Belarus's politics, economy, and military potential by 2030, according to an internal Kremlin document that was obtained by a group of journalists. The development of strategic goals was in 2021. The plan is divided into 3 stages: until 2022, until 2025, and until 2030. According to the document, during these 9 years, the Kremlin wants to establish the dominance of the Russian language over the Belarusian language, adjust the Belarusian legislation to the Russian one, subjugate the socio-political, trade, scientific, and cultural life of Belarus, increase military presence on the territory of Belarus, and grant Russian citizenship to Belarusians. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Qin Gang, Chinese foreign minister, has stated that China is deeply worried about the conflict in Ukraine spiraling out of control. The CEO of Rheinmetall, Armin Paperga, announced that the first batch of ammunition for anti-aircraft Gepard systems will be delivered to Ukraine by July. Additionally, 20 Marder fighting vehicles will be ready to be delivered to Ukraine by the end of March. The European Council has decided to prolong sanctions against Russia, imposed because of its war against Ukraine, until February 24, 2024. As many as 22 EU member states support the joint procurement of ammunition for Ukraine. Slovenia is one of them. US President Biden has met with Polish President Duda during his visit to Poland. Duda reminded Biden during his visit of the 40th head of the White House, Ronald Reagan, who contributed to the collapse of the USSR thanks to the tough policies of Washington. The Polish Consul General, Adrian Kubicki, said Biden and Duda will discuss the establishment of a permanent NATO base in Poland. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. As of February 13, 2023, the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, had recorded 18,955 civilian casualties since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This consisted of 7,199 killed and 11,756 injured. 697 of the civilian casualties occurred in January 2023. The OHCHR has stated it believes that the actual figures are considerably higher. Based on other independent analysis, over 16,000 civilians have likely been killed. Data from January 2023 indicated that the violence continued along the 1,200-kilometer front line, but was primarily concentrated in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia oblasts. Throughout January 2023, there was a very high intensity and worsening trend of damage being inflicted on both medical and educational facilities. These incidents and continued civilian casualties are likely largely due to Russia's lack of discrimination in the use of artillery and other area weapon systems. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed the formal integration of the Russian-backed proxy militias from Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts into the Russian military, denying reported command changes within the proxy units, the institute reported. In response to widespread military blogger and proxy criticism about the reported dismissal of Donetsk Oblast proxy militia spokesman Edward Bazurin on February 17th, the Russian Defense Ministry denied reports about the alleged dismissal of officers in the integrated proxy units. The integration may be part of Russia's efforts to professionalize its military amid shortcomings in unit cohesion and a year of failures and setbacks on the battlefield. However, integrating proxy militias into the Russian military will likely cause tensions as the proxy servicemen have not been trained as professional soldiers, the institute said. Proxy servicemen have also repeatedly complained about unequal treatment from the Kremlin. Russian mobilized servicemen have also recently accused the militia formations of abuse and discrimination, according to the researchers. Such untimely restructuring of the command structure may reduce cohesion within the proxy units and between them and Russian forces. The researchers further argue this restructuring is likely the reason why the Russian command has cut off the independent access of Wagner mercenaries to artillery shells and heavy weaponry. Ukraine is capable of regaining the initiative in 2023 with sufficient and timely support from the West. The analysts noted the statements of President Volodymyr Zelensky and Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov that Ukrainian troops continue preparing for counteroffensives in the near future. The institute quoted Fedor Venislavsky, a member of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, who stated that Russia had deployed all combat-capable units on the contact line in Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts and partially in Zaporizhia Oblast. The analysts emphasized that Venislavsky confirmed their assessment that Russia does not have large idle combat-ready reserves that could be diverted and change the course of the operation. Other topics assessed were: Chechen Republic head Ramzan Kadyrov likely publicized the meeting he had with Prigozhin on an unspecified date in order to assuage Prigozhin's possible anger at Kadyrov's likely refusal to join Prigozhin's informational campaign against the Russian Ministry of Defense. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. government is concerned that China is considering providing lethal aid to Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense likely responded to a call for the Russian military to systematically target electrical infrastructure supporting Ukrainian nuclear power plants by setting possible informational conditions for strikes aimed at forcing emergency shutdowns at these nuclear power plants. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The Russian Federation does not stop destroying the critical infrastructure of our country, continues to strike and fire artillery at civilian objects and houses of the civilian population. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on conducting offensive operations in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Shakhtarsk directions. In connection with the high level of desertion from the ranks of the Russian occupation forces, since February 20th of this year, mass roundups have been conducted in the Chaplinka district of the Kherson region. Special attention is paid to abandoned cottages and houses. Since the beginning of 2023, the criminogenic situation has significantly worsened in the temporarily occupied territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, in particular in the city of Sevastopol. The reason was the appearance of ex-prisoners who fought in the so-called Wagner military unit and were amnestied after the end of the contract. In case of detention for committed crimes, they are not sent to correctional institutions but back to the front line. And that concludes another report. If you're interested in any of the articles, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.